without a Taiwan Relations Act the way that the US does, how does Japan interact with Taiwan?
There's a similar arrangement as far as uh, a unofficial, diplomatic, economic, cultural uh, office in Taiwan, and the Taiwanese government, the Republic of China government, has representation similar to an embassy and consulates around the country. So I live in Western Japan, and there's a Taiwanese consulate, not formally named that, but for all due practical purposes, that's what it is in my area. And there's another one not too far away. So it's very similar to the U.S. U.S. has the American Institute of Taiwan, and Taiwanese, representatives are in D.C., for example. There are retired or former military officials that are located in Taiwan that are Japanese, who are basically unofficial attaches, but everything is, unofficial. And politicians are allowed to interact. And Former President Lee, for example, has visited Japan. And A couple of years before he passed away, he visited Okinawa again. There are sister city relationships, very robust relationships. There's a great deal of trade between the two countries. So there is a lot of interaction, but it's essentially at an unofficial level, except at the political level, at local levels, or between elected representatives.
So when you say that Japan needs a Taiwan Relations Act type of law, are you mostly talking about how it talks about the U.S. needing to provide defense capabilities for Taiwan, spelling out the defense aspect of the Japan-Taiwan relationship?
Uh, that is something I would like to see, and there are several drafts of a Taiwan Relations Act that exist. The first one was written in 2005, and the most recent one I haven't seen, but the one before that was in 2020. And so there are different versions of it, and they're all given different names. One might be called the Taiwan Foundation Act, one is the Taiwan Relations Act, and one is the Taiwan Interchange or Exchange Act. And the different names kind of reflect the effort to lower the political tension that could produce. So, for example, anything that has a defense connotation to it the wording would be very, very general, to basically allow it to, get passed in Parliament, for example. The intent being that once it's passed, they can build onto it and add to it. So that's sort of the idea of having a very weakened or weak version of the bill. Then it could grow in the future. One thing that there's general agreement on is that there should be robust economic and trade relations, robust political and sister city relations, robust disaster cooperation areas and education exchange and stuff like that. The big divergence among people who talk about this is whether a defense angle should be included in it this time or not. If they're going to do it, I'd like to see it included because, again, they don't have much time to move forward with this. And the reason I emphasize that they don't have much time has to do with the statement that was made earlier this year in March by Admiral Davidson in the Senate hearings. The reason that he said 6 years has not been made public, but based on my own research, my theory is that because China's focused so much on the development of its satellite killing technologies, that China has a real advantage in that area. And the US won't be able to deploy a satellite protection system until about 2026. And so the so-called 6-year window, if we take the beginning of 2021 and the end of 2026, so in other words, 2027, that's probably the 6-year window that he was talking about. And as you know, we can't fight a modern war without satellites because they provide, the GPS and the communications and all that. So China's at a real advantage right now. Next year in February, it'll be hosting the Winter Olympics. So, you can debate whether it would make a move at that time. Russia certainly did with Crimea, but whether China would move at this point or not sure. And then in the fall next year, around this time, the Communist Party will be having its gathering. So, is it going to move before then, or most likely after then? Personally, I think it'll be shortly after that, but I'm not a specialist on China by any means. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they were to move a year from now, from 2022 until after that. They're not going to wait until 2026 when the satellite protection system, defense system, is being introduced. They're going to move a lot more quickly. And I would think they would move quickly before Japan can get its act together to create a Taiwan Relations Act and the guidelines that would allow U.S.-Japan cooperation in a Taiwan contingency before that's formatted and they've trained for that. So kind of the 2022, 23, maybe at the latest 2024, to me, is that window that we need to be focusing on.
So you're saying that if we want to go on vacation in Taiwan, we better do it soon?
Yeah, very soon. Yeah. Unfortunately, I hope it doesn't get to that point, and that's why, deterrence is so extremely important. And sometimes deterrence is military, but it can be political, it can be economic, it could be, diplomatic. So there's so many areas that needs to be done. But the more that Taiwan can be brought into, international society and international institutions, and the more countries recognize that Taiwan, is a legitimate player in the international community, and that its independence or autonomy is vital to the interests of the global community. I'm very worried in that regard. So we need to move forward quickly on that.
There's a final thing I think we need to talk about as far as Japanese politics go. There's a very important position called the Minister of Infrastructure, Land, and Transportation. You talk about that a lot. Why is that so important, and how is that affected in the upcoming election?
Great, thank you very much. So I recently wrote a commentary on that issue too. So within Japan, because of government restructuring that took place approximately 20 years ago, the Japanese Coast Guard falls under what's called the Ministry of Infrastructure, Land, and Transportation, or MILT. And the Japanese Coast Guard is essentially the front line for defending Japan's territorial waters. And one of the most important islands, or set of islands, that Japan is trying to defend are the Senkaku Islands, which China, all of a sudden around 1970 started declaring that the Senkakus belonged to China, although everything it had done in the past suggested otherwise. So in my opinion, China does not have any legitimate claims to the islands whatsoever. And I wrote a book on that topic 6-7 years ago. So the Coast Guard's on the front lines of that. And the organization that basically has jurisdiction of the Coast Guard is the MILT. And the minister in charge of that will essentially make the decisions about how the Coast Guard will respond to certain situations and whether to escalate or de-escalate, whether to enforce Japanese sovereignty, Japanese administrative rights, all the norms that international countries expect. That minister may decide not to, anger China or impact China or escalate with China. So that's a total decision that the government, would theoretically, stand by or support. Unfortunately, in this case, the minister belongs to a junior coalition party that has extremely close ties with China. And they were the party that was essentially the bridge between Japan and China opening up ties and relations in the 1970s. And again, they're called Komeito. Since 2012, a Komeito representative, again, they have close ties with China, has been the head of the ministry for the past 9 years. And there's a great concern that the Coast Guard is not able to defend Japan's interests because of the minister's ties with China. And that would be, essentially the equivalent of, our, minister or defense secretary, being, at the beck and call of a foreign government. In any democracy, it's best to have, either change in government on a regular basis, or at least a structure where one party isn't always controlling, one government agency. Because you can imagine what would happen: the corruption, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability. So on that basis alone, there should be a healthy rotation of people. But unfortunately, that hasn't taken place. And then on top of that, that political party has close ties with China. And I'm very, very, concerned about that. And I'm not the only one. There are many people in Japan that have voiced concerns about that. Unfortunately, the culture doesn't allow them to really speak up in public about that. And so it took somebody, from the outside to, specifically write about that.